So if you want to take it away, Tyler, go for it.
All right, so I just want to start by doing an intro. My name is Tyler Swim. I'm a mental health practitioner. This is my second year. I'm at Middletown Elementary and Chansey Elementary. Prior to that, I was with Seven County School Based for about 6 or 7 years. And then
Good morning. My name is Elise Christensen. I am also an LCSW. I am a mental health practitioner. I was at Seven Counties prior to coming to this job for about 10 years. Last year was my first job as a mental health practitioner here at JCPS. So we wanted to get started by just acknowledging the stuff that's going on in the world. Keep losing my slides though. Okay. So we are right now in the middle of both a global and a racism pandemic. Both of these pandemics are likely having a huge effect on our staff and our students. Students have been at home much more, which means they're seeing and hearing news about the seriousness of this pandemic. They also are seeing the lives lost and impacted by the COVID-19 pandemic that we're experiencing. And we'll talk more about what the impact of being at home is for our students. Our students have also likely heard or witnessed either via social media or the news or even possibly in person, the violent acts targeting Black people in America. These have been going on for years, unfortunately. It seems as the more technology we get, the more we get to see them live on social media, which is definitely very traumatic to watch, especially I would think as a Black person in America. So in addition to witnessing those events, we also are seeing the racial uprising that's occurring, which although is so necessary in this country to try to undo some of the racism that's going on, it's really hard for our younger kids especially, but also adolescents to really process and understand, especially with the rioting and the looting that goes along with the peaceful protest. So just processing that can be really challenging for our students.
And another thing with students being home during NTI, they may have experienced or witnessed other things as well that they might not have if at school. Things like arguments between parents or family members, or our older students, mainly like our middle and high schoolers, who have added responsibilities when at home, some of which are having to watch their younger siblings and having to help them with their NTI coursework. Changes in parent-guardian mood and behavior, especially if parent-guardian has lost their job due to this pandemic, as well as changes in health or nutrition. Many JCPS students, their most significant and routine meals are provided by JCPS. And while a significant amount of schools are still offering food and nutrition services to students during this time, not all families have access to transportation and have a way to make it to school to get those meals. Another thing that I wanted to talk about with you all are NTI counseling request forms. For NTI 2.0, counselors and MHPs at every school have had to create a virtual platform for counseling request forms. And I have posted a couple of links in this presentation of what those look like, and I was going to show those to you all. I want to make sure it works so I can show that. So let me give it a minute. Okay, there we go. So this is what a counseling support request form looks like. And what I've done is I've added my school's counselor. This is an example of the one I created for Middletown. So me and the counselor are on here, and this is just a way where anybody can request. It can be a teacher, a parent, or even a student themselves. And they click on that link that I have also on my school's site that I created. They put in their email address. They put who they are making the request. If it's an adult making a request, they can put in how they know that student and the best way to contact. And then student information, which is optional, is given student name, last name, best way to contact the student, what grade they're in. Again, this is for elementary, but middle school and high school MHPs and counselors will have it with proper grade on there for them. And then what the concern is on there. Additional information you want to share, whether or not it's an emergency. And then we also have, in case it is an emergency, obviously 911, or there's also suicide prevention hotline on there, just for access and means there. And just, it's important to know that if it's not an emergency, it can take maybe 2 to 3 days for a counselor MHP to get back to you all on that. The other thing I want to show you is an example of this Google site that all MHPs have been asked to create. And this is the Middletown page I created. And basically all this has on is the intro as to who I am, has ways to contact me, has my Google Voice number on there. Then there's a line in here about, is your child interested in receiving services through Middletown? There's a link to that counseling request form I just showed you. And then there's also a link to a telehealth consent form that all families must sign in order for MHPs to meet with their students. And there's just all kinds of other information on here as well for what a child needs might look like if they need therapy services. There's links in here for videos of COVID-related coping and other resources. I've created a YouTube channel and a playlist. Families can access that way. And then there's just other links down here based off different mood or behaviors, and just all kinds of resources just students, families, or even teachers can use. I've also reached out to teachers to ask them to include that in their Google Classroom as well. So that's definitely an option that I think many MHPs have on the table this year. And just, if you're a teacher, if you're staff at the school, reach out to your MHP and your school counselor, because there's many things that we're trying to do this year to better collaborate with you all during NTI 2.0. And know too that in those referral request forms, many MHPs and counselors may also need a follow-up form to teachers after counseling request has been made. So if we get a request from a student or a family member, we might be reaching out to you directly to get a little more knowledge that you might have and that you might be able to provide us.
I think our slides got mixed up, but here are a couple other ways the pandemic could be impacting students. Homelessness, with the economic crisis that we're in, a lot of people have lost their jobs or have had changes in jobs, and so those things can lead to homelessness, food insecurity. As we mentioned, our students are experiencing a loss of their normal routines. That's both at school and at home. Everything is a little different right now. They have decreased social interactions. Their sense of safety in the world could be impacted. A lot of students, especially the younger ones, and even our high schoolers, may not have really been aware of the racism pandemic. And obviously COVID is new, but just hearing about all these things and having it in the news all the time can really impact your sense of safety, especially if you have a loved one who has passed away or been harmed as a result. They and teachers and staff and all adults, everybody might be having difficulty sleeping. With kids, you might see behavioral regressions due to the changes in routine. You might have little ones who aren't, who are acting maybe more like babies, or they're acting younger than normal, or some kids who have disabilities who might be having a harder time. You might see some regressions in their progress. There's also, when kids are home more, as we know, there's a potential for increased exposure of abuse or community violence. Schools are often our kids' safe place. It's where they feel safe and they get away from all of that. And then when we think about guardians and technology, that is a whole layer of stress I know that we're all feeling trying to learn about technology, but our parents and grandparents and aunts and uncles and everybody, they might be having a really hard time accessing the virtual learning platforms and understanding how to work those and make sure their kids are on at the right time, which we could see some struggles there. as well.
What I want to talk about now is indicators of when a student might need counseling or mental health supports. And some things to consider would be a sudden or significant drop in participation or students withdrawing. If you have the same student in class this school year and notice a significant change in their behaviors, their personality, or if you see a quote unquote different student, if the student is frequently talking about the pandemics and related fears and anxieties they may have, including expressing concern about when and if we return to in-person instruction, as well as things they may be hearing or seeing on the news, as well as witnessing in their own community. If a student is displaying hopelessness, if a student is frequently complaining of being tired, stressed, and overwhelmed. And another thing I think that's very important to consider, especially during this NTI 2.0, are kindergartners, sixth graders, and freshmen, students who are beginning at a brand new school virtually. And it's gotta be a very unique and interesting experience for them. And one example I just want to share is my parents' next door neighbor is a sixth grader getting ready to start. And she just does not know what to think, is worried about going back to school, and is worried about making a jump if it does get returned to in-person this year, from going to elementary school with maybe 400 to a middle school with over 1,000 people. And I think that's one thing that we definitely as educators have to keep our eye on and have to be aware of. And as teachers, I would encourage you all, just if you notice any child, any of your students, maybe just needing something and you just can't quite put your finger on it, reach out to your MHP, reach out to your counselor. That's one of the things we're here for.
Okay, I'm going to talk about some more indicators that you might see in your classrooms. You would see them a lot more easily, obviously, than virtually, but I'm going to try to make sure to apply it to the virtual setting as well when I talk about these things. So these are some indicators that some students might need some extra support. So the first one is poor academic achievement. This one might be a little bit easier to see during the virtual, classrooms. You're going to see kids who maybe just aren't interested in school, have no motivation. They're not showing up to your scheduled classes. They're not turning in work. You might see grades dropping. This is especially something that you will notice if you do happen to have the same student in class. I know we mentioned before, like, if a student is acting differently than they normally do. So, maybe you had a student who really was a high achiever last school year, but now this year you're noticing a decline in grades. That might be a good indicator that that student might need some additional support, at least some problem solving there. Another thing you might notice is anxiety.
Why is this not?
So you might notice a student who is tearful or expressing worries a lot, is feeling really oversensitive. Some physical symptoms. So if you are doing some kind of check-in with your students or some time where you're just kind of chatting with them, you might listen for students complaining of headaches or stomach aches, or just feeling worried. That might be something you listen for. If it's a consistent, I think we're all worried sometimes. When we talk about mental health, we're talking about a consistent, repetitive, they can't seem to shake those worries. Another thing you might notice in terms of the physical symptoms is if a student has to use the bathroom, they have to get up a lot, they have to, they can't seem to stay seated. That could be another sign that you notice. Signs of depression, being sad, irritable, tearful again. Reports of difficulty sleeping or eating or feeling hopelessness. This is going to be a little bit hard to identify. This is something that we probably would identify more through a check-in or just general conversation with your students. You might also notice with depression some of that poor academic achievement, a decline in grades. Often with depression, especially with older students, but probably across the board, is that decline in motivation, and it's more of a decline in energy. They just don't feel like they have the energy to do anything, even if that means getting out of bed in the morning. So those are some things to watch for. Anger, that's going to be kind of the kiddos who are verbally or physically aggressive, having discipline problems, destructive, oppositional or non-compliant. Again, you might notice them in your Google Meet classrooms, being defiant or oppositional, refusing to do things that you ask them to, not following the rules of the group, things like that. Parent report can be helpful too for all of these things. I want you to remember, I know you'll be having some conversations with parents periodically, so kind of keeping your ears open for these things. Not that you have to assess these things, but just kind of keep your ears open. ADHD, attention deficit hyperactivity, you're going to see restlessness, impulsiveness, very easily distracted, short attention span, poor organizational skills. So again, watch for kids who maybe are coming in late a lot or get their schedule confused or don't seem to have their materials together, missing assignments. Those types of things can be an indicator of that. Poor peer relationships, being isolated, everyone's kind of isolated. I think this one's going to be hard to identify virtually, but if you notice anybody bullying other people, not getting along with others, argumentative with peers, if you're doing group work, those can all be indicators that somebody might need to have some additional support. Conduct issues, which include lying, stealing, fire setting. Again, you probably won't see that very much with everybody at home. But again, if you hear about it, please make sure to reach out to your MHP or counselor. Some attention-seeking behaviors could be typical for sure, because we're dealing with kids. So again, this is going to be a pattern. This isn't going to be the kid who just like occasionally goofs off because they're bored. This is the kid who is consistently showing goofiness, silliness, being the class clown, or having inappropriate peer interactions. And then family stress or adjustment difficulties. Anytime you hear about any divorce, death, substance abuse, or chronic illness in the family, that could be an indicator that a student might need to be connected with a counselor or mental health support. That doesn't mean they need therapy. It just means they might need some more check-ins to assess that, and we would take care of that for you guys. And then with our older students, obviously you want to listen for any substance use or risky behavior on their end, sneaking out. I don't know how much. I think sometimes teachers have a really close connection with their students and do hear about some of this stuff. Sometimes they just hear the rumors and the gossip, I think. Again, that happens more in person, I would imagine, especially in the high school level. But you might hear something about that, and that can be an indicator that the student might need some extra support. So again, just know that these are things that we want you to listen for. They're not things that you have to assess for. We will, if you have any of these concerns about a student, your counselor or mental health practitioner will help you with those things and figure out if they really need it. Our next slide, we just wanted to give you some kind of examples of what we saw during NTI 1.0. I work at a high school, so some things that I saw specifically with the students I worked with is they were struggling with some grief. They had the loss of their sports seasons. They had, my seniors especially, prom, they didn't have prom or graduation, in-person graduation. Some pep rallies were canceled and things like that. So they had a lot of grief around missing out on that like normal high school experience. A lot of them had difficulty turning off their brains, being able to unplug, especially in the evening. I had a lot of students who were really engaged in social media and just having a constant flood of news about COVID and Breonna Taylor and all of that. They were constantly consuming that information, and they had a really hard time shutting off, their brains to kind of get into school mode or to get into, like a sleeping situation where they need to go to bed. And they had a huge loss of motivation. I saw a lot of kids struggling to participate in virtual learning. Some things that you as teachers might want to keep an eye on is, are students' cameras on? Are they vocally participating or in the chat participating? That can show you whether or not a student's engaged, as you all know. But so those are just some of the things I saw last year with my older students. I'm sure there's hundreds of more things, but that's the examples I could think of for you all today.
And then some of the things from that, I don't know, I'm getting an echo, I don't know why. Some of the things going on with elementary school cases from NTI 2.0 that I saw was anxiety, students frequently expressing fear and worry and just taking in a bunch of news, like Elise mentioned, talks of COVID and fearing if when school resumes. And routine, I think, is another big one for some of our students, is that some students need socialization and they thrive on it. So creating a social time for them to interact with teachers and peers is very important, like maybe creating a virtual lunch bunch every so often. Also, just quick changes in behaviors, constantly feeling down, lack or sudden change in participation. There were several teachers last year who I was talking to at their Google Meets. Their student wouldn't really say much or do much. Their camera would often be off, and that was different from what they were seeing when things were in person. One thing, too, I'd like to add for this is last year during our NTI, I created my own Google Voice number and reached out to families and some even students. I just let them know that this was a place where they could reach out to me. And one thing, if you do that, I would recommend that if you use Google Voice, you can set up a time to turn off all notifications. So you can pretty much set your phone to, I'm going to look at it right now on my phone so I can share exactly what it says. So if you were to go into your settings, one of the things on it is you can set it to do not disturb. So one thing I would recommend for teachers that's important to do, especially during NTI, is boundaries as well, and is to turn your phone to do not disturb at a certain time every evening, turn it on to a certain time every morning, because this NTI 2.0 isn't just going to be a focus on the students. It also needs to be a focus on teachers and staff. We don't want to overwhelm you with anything, and it's going to be important to take care of yourself as well, which another important thing for me to say is MHPs are not just at schools for students. We are also here as a resource for teachers. So do not be afraid to reach out to your school's MHP. We are here for you as well. And that kind of leads right into using school and community supports. So use your connections and school resources like mental health practitioners and counselors to discuss student needs and concerns, as well as your own needs and concerns. Consider providing a link to Google Classroom to counselors and MHPs for them to join and have a presence in some of your meetings every so often. If you're unsure of whether one of your students could benefit from counseling or mental health support, reach out to your school's counselor or MHP. And then instituting a check-in system in order to build a relationship with students and let them report how they feel, as well as using community partners like 7 Counties, Peace Hospital, or Crossroads.
And I just wanted to add a note onto that slide that Peace Hospital and the Brook are acting as normal, and they might be doing some things virtually, but they are running as normal. So, we'll still be doing sending students for assessments there. And I think Crossroads is actually going to be able to do in classroom school as part of their program and therapy and such. They're able to use some social distancing. So I think that those are good resources to know about. Okay, so we talked about how there's a lot of indicators, and I mentioned when I was going through that kind of longer slide that it's going to be hard to see some of these things virtually. You know, when we're in our classrooms in front of students, we are with them all day, every day sometimes, or if you're in an older grade, at least an hour a day or every other day, whatever. But you see them, you see what they're doing. So one thing that could be helpful during NTI would be to do some check-ins, maybe once a week, or maybe less, or maybe more, however you feel like you know your class and your students, or will learn to know them. So some examples, you can use check-ins for a variety of things. You can, it's really easy to make a quick Google form. I know you guys have a lot on your plates, but this could be a way to connect with your students, make sure they're understanding their classwork, and at the same time check in on their feelings, their sleeping routines, how they're sleeping, whether or not they have food or other resources maybe they need connections with. You can keep them so simple. You can just even add a quick check-in question at the bottom of their assignment, so it cues you into how they're feeling. So if you're giving them virtual work or paperwork, just having them right at the bottom, or do a little checkbox of how they're feeling. That can be a good way to cue you in, and also a good way to help you get to know your students. I mean, maybe you just do a check-in on some of their favorite things, or, you know, just to kind of build that rapport and that relationship. But the image on the right of your screen, the mental health check-in, obviously that's not a Google form, I just copied it. But it has a really great, I mean, it just shows how simple they can be. And it would let you know very easily like what they need. Another option is this Google form. And it is, again, it was made by one of my fellow MHPs, but it's just an easy way. The first question is, how are you feeling today? There's emojis for our little ones who maybe can't read as well, and they can, you know, see what all of the different feelings mean. And then if you scroll down, it has questions about if they need help from their teacher, or if they need some extra help from their counselor or mental health practitioner. And then if they checked yes, it gave them the option to ask about home life, social or friends, or stress, or kind of get more information about what they want to talk about, so you and we have a little bit of a heads up. Again, a lot of MHPs are making virtual platforms, so if you wanted some help with this, I would say, like, if you don't have time to create one, I would say reach out to your MHPs. We all have access to this one or one very similar to it, and I know that they would be very happy to just link it to you, and it wouldn't take any time at all for them to do that. So just so you kind of have that.
And then one thing that we're not going to get to today, I know we're running short on time, we only got a couple minutes left, but what we have copied into this presentation are 2 different videos, just tips for helping children and students cope during COVID-19, as well as signs your child or student might need therapy or counseling. Those links are in there, so I just wanted to be sure to announce that to you all in case that is something you want to look into.